Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Pawn. This is a 2-cost action card from Intrigue, and it says, choose 2, +1 card, +1 action, +1 buy, +1 coin. The choices must be different. So every time you play Pawn, you get 2 of those 4 actions in total to pick from. Now, there are 6 possible combinations in total that you can take from Pawn. I'm not going to list them all out and go over each of them individually because I actually don't think that's a very helpful way of thinking about Pawn strategically. Now, most of these combinations of 6 options that you can pick from, on their own, they're not actually very good, and they tend to be worse than similar cards that are dedicated to doing just one of those roles. So most cards are actually, if they're giving you only vanilla effects, they tend to give you at least 3 of them rather than 2. So think about Candlestick Maker, that costs 2, and it's +1 action, and it's +1 buy, and it's giving you a coin, or a coffer in its case, a slightly better version of a coin. Or there might be Squire, it can give you a coin, and also 2 actions or 2 buys. Right, and Village, I know it's more expensive, but that's 2 actions and a card. Or Poacher, or Lab, right? So when you look at these cards, most things are not, they're doing a lot better than Pawn is. So when you look at one of these effects just individually on its own, Pawn doesn't look so hot, right? They're pretty poor. Obviously, the main benefit to Pawn is that it's not one of these things on its own. It can actually be whichever one you need at the given time. But it's worth keeping in mind, Pawn, for filling a particular dedicated role, it's going to be a pretty weak card, generally. So one thing that stands out with Pawn is that it gives you +buy. Now, I know that in pretty much every video I've done where a card has +buy on it, there's been a slide saying, hey, sometimes this is your only source of +buy, and therefore you need it. So you think about another card like Baron, for example. There are some decks that really don't want to use Baron, but it's a source of +buy, and so you're probably going to take it anyway if you need it. Well, Pawn, the options that give you +buy tend to stick out more than the other ones on the card. Part of the reason for this is because Pawn is so cheap. It's really nice to have a source of +buy that is very cheap sometimes. It lets you amass a lot of it pretty quickly. And it can also potentially be non-terminal. And those 2 effects can actually be quite nice. Now, it's no Market Square, which is +card and +action and +buy, right, as far as sources of +buy go. But, Pawn, there you go. It's when I think to the games where I'm like, where was Pawn particularly useful and where did it stand out as a card I really wanted? It's going to be cases a lot of the time where the +buy is useful for me. Another effect, an option that we tend to take with Pawn quite a lot is +1 card, +1 action. Now, this is something that we call a do-nothing cantrip. You will have heard me talk about this in other videos. For example, the Wishing Well video. So Wishing Well, if you fail to guess the correct card all of the time, then Wishing Well is just giving you +1 card, +1 action, and that's a do-nothing cantrip. And I sort of mentioned this in those other videos because a brand new player might see a card giving +1 card, +1 action and say, oh, this card is helping me draw through my deck. But it's actually not. All it's doing is replacing itself with the next card in your draw pile, which is what you would have had if you just never bought it anyway. Right, this is sort of why you don't buy, plain Village really early a bunch of the time, because it's not doing anything for you at the time. So given all of that analysis that you've seen before, it might be very easy to assume with Pawn that therefore you shouldn't actually buy it if that's the only thing you're going to be doing with it. But this isn't really the case with Pawn. You actually do tend to buy them and use +card, +action quite a lot in a number of decks, and that's because Pawn has the option to do other things. But sometimes you just don't want that other thing right now, and this is where the flexibility of Pawn and its option to do that really is what the card is all about. So there's a couple of examples of reasons to use +card, +action. I'm going to go through some of them now. So Pawn, because it's so cheap, you might want to buy one really early. Maybe you opened a 5-2 and you've got this 2 coin hand, and you're like, well, what do I want for 2? There's not really many good options. What's really nice with pawn is that you might eventually decide in your deck that you're going to want a source of plus buy at some point. Maybe you're going to build up to double province or just buying multiple engine components per turn. But it might not be ready for a weak source of plus buy right now. So what you can do is you can buy the pawn on that early turn, and then you just use it for plus card plus action until your deck is ready to start using it for the plus buy. This way you sort of make the most out of those dud turns or any spare 2 coin purchases that you have throughout the game, so that you're in a better position when you're ready to start using it, because you've already got it in your deck. So that's a reason why you might buy a pawn and then just plus card plus action it a whole bunch of times until later on in the game. Another thing is that if you get a lot of opportunities to buy a pawn because you just keep getting these spare 2 coin purchases throughout, then buying extra copies of pawn is actually still a good idea, even if you can't really support any other type of use other than card and action. So it might be that you simply just don't have much draw, and you really don't have much terminal space either. So, card and action are sort of the best things pawn's going to do for you. The reason why this is useful to keep buying them in these cases is because, say you have 5 pawns in your deck, and really you only need 1 because you must get a +1 buy at the end. It's going to be really helpful for you. Well, if you play the first 4 of those as cantrips, then what that means is that the pawn being the weak source of plus buy came a lot later in drawing your deck, and that just sort of mitigates some of the shuffle luck a little bit. So this is sort of like we talked about in the Secret Passage video, where essentially what you're doing is you're playing it and you're taking a weak card and you're shunting it to the end of your deck to just say, actually, I'm going to draw that weak card. Pretend it was drawn really later. It's because you want your villages and your smithies first. I've talked about this in a lot of videos. So if you just get a lot of pawns, you do get a little bit of this effect where you essentially are smoothing out your draws a little bit with each pawn. Now, it's only really all contributing to just helping improve the shuffle luck of one particular card. And you might think to yourself, buying a lot of pawns, that's not a very good effect overall to just help draw one card slightly later in your deck. And it's true that's not. But because pawn is so cheap, you might just be able to pick it up anyway when you weren't getting anything otherwise. You certainly weren't going to be buying an estate or a copper, so to pick up the pawn, right? And then you just get that little bit of an effect. So that's where you would buy a pawn specifically only to cantrip it, essentially. Another thing, for example, is remodeling coppers and curses. This is normally pretty weak because what are you going to turn it into? Estates? Turn your curses into other coppers. It would take 2 remodels to start getting something good. But with pawn around, because it costs 2, you can remodel those curses into a pawn, and then this is kind of like trashing the card, because if you're only ever going to use the pawn as a cantrip, it's like the card just isn't in your deck, right? It's just always going to be just replaced with the next one. So you can use remodel as kind of a thinner when pawn is available, just to cantrip, to just churn past what used to be coppers. Right. Now, there are more examples of when you would want to do something like as a solely do-nothing cantrip. However, I've decided to delay that discussion until the video where we talk about Pearl Diver, which is in the next expansion that I'm going to cover, Seaside. The reason for that is because there's basically nothing to discuss in the Pearl Diver video otherwise, and it's also a 2-cost card that is most known for being basically just a do-nothing cantrip that costs 2. So I thought, well, let's talk more about that in the Pearl Diver video, and we'll focus a little bit more on what makes pawn unique in this video, which I think is just going to be a lot more useful, a better way to spend our time right now. So, if you're thinking of examples and I've not covered them, well, you might see them later. Now, another thing that people might think of pawn being useful for is like copper in an action card form. So you can take plus action and plus coin. And this is something that we call disappearing money. So we've talked about that in, say, the Minion video or the Festival video, where certain decks, particularly stuff like Draw to X, really want your money in non-terminal stop card form as an action, so that it can take the cards out of your hand in the middle of your action phase to get some use out of it. However, just bear in mind that pawn is a lot weaker than cards like Minion and Festival, right? Because +1 coin is a lot worse than +2, and it can actually be quite hard to draw the number of pawns that you need. Now, the good thing with pawn is that if it is you are struggling to do a library pawn deck, for example, which isn't very good, just as a heads up, you can always cantrip some of those pawns. Say I haven't drawn a second library. Well, I'm just going to keep drawing with pawns until I find one. But the problem is that you're basically giving up that money that turn. And, you need a lot of pawns, and you don't actually get that much money overall from the pawns. So pawn actually isn't very good in this way, but you can usually support some. If you were doing Festival Library anyway, then having some pawns picked up on spare 2 coins, it's probably better than not having them, right? You're still adding some money to your deck most of the time, right? It's just you don't want it to be your only source of disappearing money. It's really bad at doing that. If you need a lot of money, pawn is not going to be able to get you there to do that. Another thing with pawn is that this copper effect is actually a lot more useful if you have overdraw. So if I'm just building an engine, preparing to start buying victory cards later, it might be that I overbuild a little bit at first, so I've got way more draw than I actually have cards to play. Now, what's nice with pawn is that if you are drawing lots of cards and you've got all these pawns in your hand, maybe you're drawing just enough, and you've also got 4 pawns and you're drawing them all, well, you can use those pawns as coppers for now. And then if you start adding provinces to your deck, what you'll find is that now you can't quite draw everything that you need to. You can sacrifice some of those pawns into now turning them into cantrips, and that means that you will continue to just get a little bit through your deck. So each time you add a card to your deck, a stop card, one of those pawns that you're using for coppers can effectively flip over to now being a cantrip, and you can continue to keep drawing your deck for a little while. It's not going to produce as much money, but it is still, it's sort of like having a copper that you can trash out of your deck whenever you need to. So if you think back to the chapel video, I talk a lot about the harm of over-trashing and how stuff like copper is actually kind of useful in the beginning of the game, and if you draw early on in your deck when it's mostly copper, they actually are useful for money. So this is where pawn can sort of substitute that effect a little bit, and that when early on you just have more draw, you can still get just a little bit of extra money. But again, this is something that's not super strong, so it's probably that you're just going to be buying pawn when you have spare money, rather than specifically using it for this. But do bear in mind this is an option that is available to you when you have a load of pawns. Something that I do see now and then is that you can use pawn to try and replace an opening silver. So card draw really early on when your deck is mostly copper is fairly similar to generating +1 coin. It's not quite as good, but it's pretty close. So if we take the +1 card and +1 coin option from pawn, and we draw a copper, that is giving us 2 money, sort of like if we had a silver in our hand. So what you can do is that sometimes you sort of only begrudgingly open with silver. You actually would rather not have any silvers in your deck at all, because you want to get rid of all those stock cards as soon as you can. And in this case, pawn can be nice because you get to use it once or twice for this as a silver substitute, and then it's out of your deck, right? You can just cantrip the pawn for the rest of the game, and eventually later on it might be that plus buy that you need in the future. So, that can be nice in just being a little bit more efficient. But there is a problem with this, and that is that it depends a lot on what your other opening buy was. So if you have your other opening buy in your hand and it's a terminal, well, you can't use this option now with pawn. Or if you don't have it in your hand, do you really want to draw a card dead, play pawn as terminal draw, and run the risk of drawing that other opening card dead? If the other opening card is really powerful, then you might completely screw yourself if you actually end up not being able to use it because you opened with pawn instead of silver. But keep your eye out for this anyway. Just bear in mind, you can use pawn as essentially like a one-shot silver substitute early on in the game. Basically, that is the thing that is available. So it's very kingdom dependent. So I can't really go into it too much more, I'm afraid. Some other minor uses of pawn. So if you are getting a lot of bad draws, you're struggling to draw your deck, but you've got a lot of spare action, so maybe all your villages came first and now you can't find your draw cards, pawn does give you the option to sacrifice what you were gonna be using it for and continue to try and draw by using it for plus card. So it might be that the pawn you eventually were going to use for like action buy or buy and coin, well, now you could use plus card and take the buy as well. And at the end of it, well, maybe you've got that one less coin, or maybe there's one other card that now you can't play, but it did save your turn, right? It kept you drawing, and then you found the card that you actually needed. That can be helpful with pawn. So, and if sometimes you have, like, say you just need 8 to buy the final province and win the game, and you've got 7 in your hand and a pawn, well, don't play the pawn as a cantrip. You can just take the coin right now, and then you run. You don't need to worry about that risk of saying, oh no, I need to draw a card at random and I hope it's a copper or a silver or whatever. The pawn is there. It just gives you the option to say, don't take this risk. Just, I'll give you the coin that you need now. And there you go. You get to make the value of the purchase that you want. Otherwise, that's kind of it for pawn. So, you do, each time you play it, you do have to just assess the options available and think to yourself, well, what do I actually want? But don't feel bad if you're taking plus card plus action a lot, and don't feel bad if you're only really buying it for the plus buy, because that sort of is what pawn is. And that's sort of just how the card works effectively. So, yeah. Anyways, what we are going to do now is we are going to head on over to the online client, and we're going to generate some kingdoms with pawn in it, and we are going to see how good it is in that kingdom. So here we have sentry and trading post trash, we have laboratory for draw, we have market, we've also got an artisan, we've got nobles as village, which is very expensive, but what are our terminals anyway? Artisan. This deck, we've got an artisan to get a lot of markets and labs. This deck seems, the engine, yeah, you're definitely going to open. There's no good 4-cost card. It's interesting because Vassal is here, actually. Is this a good Vassal deck? I think it is because there's Sentry, right? Even though you have that, like, Artisan as one terminal, you could have a deck here where Artisan is your only terminal. I think you might want a Nobles anyway, but otherwise I'm looking to play a lot of Markets and Sentries and Laboratories and Vassals. Maybe not Wishing Well. Do I open with a Wishing Well? Possibly. I can see myself opening Vassal and Wishing Well on this deck. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Sentry and I'm going to try and trash. I'm not picking up Trading Post. And then I'm going to shift over to, I want to find an Artisan. I want to start picking up a load of Markets. I'm going to play with Vassal. Is Pawn any good? Well, Market is already a very good source of plus buy. However, if I have a spare 2, it's really not that awful, right? It just is more do-nothing cantrips that is quite nice for a Vassal economy. And sometimes you might just want that extra plus buy because you didn't draw any markets or something, and Pawn will help you there. So Pawn's okay on this deck. There is actually another card that gives you all of the options of Pawn instead of just 2 of them. It's like way better than Pawn in Market, but given that this deck wants a bunch of cantrips, and it just wants high action density with Vassal, and you have a whole bunch of spare buys because you just get a ton of plus buys, especially if you're gaining a load of markets with Artisan. Yeah, I think Pawn does okay in this kingdom, honestly. It's fine. It's still weak, but, it costs 2. It's about what I'd expect from a 2-cost card that is useful in this particular kingdom, right? So Pawn is fine. I will probably get some on spare 2, but I'm not going to open with it. And it's just for the action density, really. Here, we have Steward to trash. We have Torturer for draw, but is there any village? There is not. There is no village, so Minion is going to be much better draw here. We want to open Steward, and we want to use that to trash our deck. We want to pick up Lurkers on spare 2 hands, and we want to try and gain a load of minions. And this is going to be a big minion stack. Is Vassal going to be good here? We can get thin pretty easily. There is a risk that we hit the Steward, and that's the end of our turn. But otherwise, Vassal, it seems like we're going to try and get a load of non-terminals in our deck. And pretty similar to the last game, that means that pawn actually has some use. And in addition to that, pawn is a better source of plus buy than the only other one available, which is council room, because we don't want any council rooms in our deck. But pawn, we can play it for action and buy, and then keep going with drawing minion. Now, I don't know if we want necessarily that many. I guess it's fine. We can always just cantrip them. Our aim, though, really is we really want to win by getting a load of minions, probably some vassals, and that's sort of how we're drawing and getting our money. We're probably going to get a bunch of vassals. Yeah, and pawn will just be extra buy to help us with that. But really, how good our deck goes, like we are reliant on minion for a lot of draw here. And we've got like Lurker is a stop card as well. Pawn's going to be a stop card for buy. So yeah, and there's going to be a steward sitting in our deck somewhere. So yeah, this is like a minion stack, and pawn is good as a source of buy here. And we will get any spares if we need to. We're definitely picking up a bunch of pawns. I guess we're only going to stick with 2 lurkers because we're worried about stop card space, and we're going to get pawns on remaining 2s, which we should be able to get a bunch of, I think. We're going to want a pawn at some point, but we are going to open with steward and it's workshop. I don't think we open with it, but like, is it actually any good? I think we have to do steward and silver actually, so that we can actually get up to 5. No, we don't, because we've got lurker. Do we just open steward and lurker? Maybe that's fine, right? Steward and lurker, and then we pick up another lurker, and then we start getting pawns on 2, and then we're going to start getting minions. I just don't think workshop is worth it. Maybe it's a better final terminal than steward at some point, but I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe we need it to get a lot of vassals. Actually, I guess workshop's fine. Anyway, yeah, pawn is okay here. It's kind of similar to the last kingdom, but we do need it for the plus buy. So actually, I guess it is very important. It's not just okay. It's a pretty important card. When are we getting them? We're going to get some at some point. What do we have here? So we have steward to trash again. We have ironworks, which is a lot better than workshop, like in the last kingdom. Now we have shantytowns. So we do have a village, but it's a pretty poor village. We are going to have really high action density here. But we do have library to draw. We've also got council room, but we do have library. And I think library is going to be better because we've got lurker, we've got ironworks. These cards are not going to draw. Where are we getting our money from? This is the main problem. Well, we do have Baron, but I don't know how much I like Baron in the library deck. I mean, maybe it's okay. I can definitely see that we are opening Steward and Ironworks, and we are going to leave an estate in our deck, but otherwise trash down. I don't think Lurker's super helpful here. I think that we get a Baron and we just buy libraries. I don't really like Lurker. I'm rather happy pick up extra stuff with Ironworks. But what are we going to get without Ironworks? It's like shantytowns, pawns. Maybe we do want Lurkers to help with library, actually. Maybe we do get some at some point. But yeah, I think... Do I really open Baron Steward and hope to get an early library? It's money generation is the big problem here. The other alternative, instead of doing all this stuff, is to just do like council room money. I guess there's gardens for use of plus buy, but oh man, that doesn't feel very good at all. Because otherwise it's like shantytown and Baron with library. It just, the draw feels really poor here, honestly. But I don't know, there's a lot of action cards. You do have pawn to help like get more use out of library and get extra money, so I think it has to be the Ironworks engine with all of these fairly weak action cards, but the action cards are not great. And there is like council room, and if your opponent's doing a library engine, then you don't actually care that you're drawing your opponent an extra card, because it just means their next library draws one less sometimes. I don't know, is council room money actually going to be good enough to beat the library engine here? It honestly might be. Like, I wonder if in a council room engine you open Baron. Do you still open Baron and like silver? Do I want the Baron? I mean, maybe it's fine. It gets me the council room. It gets me early golds, actually. Which is nice as well, instead of a lot of silvers. I think Council Room might be fast enough, actually. Pawn is okay if I do go the library engine. It's really bad if I go for the Council Room big money thing. Then again, you've got Lurker, and there is Gardens. You see, the thing that the library deck has going for it is that with Ironworks and Lurker, you can get quite a lot of cards. And that makes it a little bit better for working against the Council Room engine, but it is going to clog. And no, it's actually really bad for library, because it's just going to clog up terribly. You aren't going to be able to get enough. I think maybe I'm just more convinced about Council Room money here, honestly. It doesn't feel good enough, the library engine, to really work out. So, I don't know, man. Yeah, okay. Anyway, pawn is fine if we go library. It's useless if we go Council Room. It's not even very good as a sorcerer plus buy, because it's like Baron, and there's Council Room for the other person. So it's only okay. It's like disappearing money, but it's pretty weak for an engine that's it's just not really good enough. Okay, so I think it's a bust on that board. I think Council Room. I'm not going to spend too long on it. Council Room money's better. Here we have Chapel to get thin really fast. What are we going to do after we've got that? We've got Festival Library, I notice, and we do have Artisan to pick these up. So yeah, Chapel, Festival Library, I think that's pretty clear that that's going to be what we're doing. We do need to hit 5 early on. Do we go Chapel Baron? I kind of like that as an opening, actually. If we collide the Chapel and the Baron, that's fine, but we're just keeping a state around. And then eventually we will collide them, and that'll help us hit 6. And that's really what we want, because we actually just want an Artisan to start picking up festivals ASAP. And we don't even need laboratories. We want a load of festivals, and then it's library time, right? And then we've got this Baron in our deck with an estate as well, which is kind of nice. And then again, there is like merchant, so we could probably get away with 1 silver, but how good is pawn here? Well, we've got all our buys and money is disappearing money. Like, it's all festival sorts it. So we can supplement that a little bit. And that's basically it. Pawn is just like a much worse festival disappearing money thing here. Doesn't seem very good. I think we want to hit Artisan as soon as we can with Baron. And pawn doesn't really get a look in. However, it is likely that we have extra money thanks to Festival, giving us 2 coins and a buy, and we're going to have a lot of them. So I can see us picking up some pawns, and if worse comes to the worst, we just cantrip them, right? Like, I don't think there's any risk here with pawn of just getting a load of them. So we might just get a load anyway, and maybe we get some extra coins out of it, and maybe we just don't do anything at all with the pawns. So that's fine. It's very weak on this board. You might buy it and it actually never does anything, or it might occasionally give you some money, but yeah. Right, its other uses are covered by stronger cards. This is the last kingdom. There is no trashing at all. And we have a potential torturer engine. But, we've got Ironworks to pick up mining villages and poachers and conspirators. Maybe not Shantytown. Big problem here is that, torturer's real nice. Because it's kind of the only thing that's really going on here. There is Ironworks to try and get a load of villages and eventually conspirators, and we're going to try and draw with Torturer, but the big problem is we just have a load of starting cards, but we really want to avoid any stock cards at all. So I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to open Ironworks and I'm going to open Pawn, and I really do not want a silver, and I'm going to hope that I hit 5 early on. And so I'm going to use Pawn as the opening silver replacement and just hope I don't draw my Ironworks dead. Or maybe Shantytown is better. No, it's not Pawn. Shantytown Ironworks, that's going to be very good at helping me to hit 5, I think. And I hope to get the Torturer. And then I've got a village in my deck already, and it's not the best village in the world. And I'm going to use the Ironworks, I'm going to start picking up the villages and poachers. And I think we really are. We might even get some Harbingers. We really want to kick off the Torture Chain. It's going to be very hard to draw this deck, but we really want it. And if we can do that, we do have Conspirator to try and boost our money a bit more, and like Poacher and stuff. How good is Pawn here? Well, because it's so hard to draw, I mean, eventually we might want one for a plus buy, and it can always just be cantripped, and that also helps a little bit with Conspirator if needs be. But it's pretty weak, and I think that's because we don't. We've got Ironworks to gain the cards that we need, right? We only want Torture as the only card above 4 that we actually care about. So I'm not sure if the buy is that good. Really, we just want to be playing the Torturers for the attack to screw over anyone who tries to go money here. You're certainly not going to do, like, moat big money, right? That's very poor indeed, I think, compared to trying to kick off the Torturer chain. And you will get to province enough that I think it's fine. Like moat, harem, it's just no, right? That's not a viable alternative. So, and we got mining villages we can explode as well, actually, later on. So actually, yeah, I think pawn for a plus buy, we do actually want some at some point. I'm sure there will be an opportunity we'll get to buy it. If not, we can pick one up with Ironworks at some point. We're only using it as a very weak source of buy in a deck that's already not very reliable. Right, it's only okay. It's very weak on this board again, but it is a buy and it is what we need. So, yeah, I guess we get some. Right, well, that's it for 5 random decks with pawn. It was only okay in all of them. It didn't blow my mind in any of those decks, right? It is a weak card. I can't deny that. Like, pawn is not some power card at all. But it was you would buy it in most of those kingdoms. I would have no problem. Like, if worst comes to the worst, it's just plus card plus action, and it didn't really hurt if you just bought it on a 2. But you'll notice that I wasn't going to prioritise it over certain other things in a lot of those decks unless I really need the plus buy. All right, it's just there, and it's fine to pick them up, I guess. In a lot of those kingdoms, it's just not super strong, but it's fine. All right, so that was it. Thank you for watching. I hope that was useful for you, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.